Hi, how's it going? Okay, you guys didn't show up for review, so this is your fault. Now I'm making a review video, and I hate you all for not coming. And just so you know, you better not put this on YouTube or do anything weird because this is embarrassing. I am doing this, but it's to help you, so I think it's worthwhile. So what I'm going to do is go through all different Regents questions, the ones that are most likely to show up on the Regents exam. Now, some we're going to talk about, they're not going to be on there. Some of them are going to be ones that are going to repeat, and some you will learn how to master, and you maybe won't see them on the exam. But these are the ones that keep popping up the most, so I think it's in your best interest to look at these. Okay, so I'm going into some of my green books. You guys only have one. What I am going to look at is a couple exams, and I am going to start with, where is it? June 2011, okay? This is in one of my old green books. You guys can find this online at U.S. Regents website, okay, for U.S. history. So that's where you're gonna find it. All right, so one question we said always shows up. There's always a map question, okay? These things usually revolve around the Louisiana Purchase, 1803. The Louisiana Purchase is going to tell us that, first of all, we have Lewis and Clark, who are going to explore the region. This is really weird, like I'm talking to myself, but anyway. And we're gonna get New Orleans from that, okay? And remember, that is Thomas Jefferson. Another thing that pops up a lot is they show you a coastline. And when they show you a coastline, I'm looking at number 2 in June of 2011. There's not a picture, but when they show you a coastline, they are going to say, why do people go to the coast? It's because there's rivers and harbors, boats can come in, trade can happen. In this particular one, we have the Louisiana Purchase question. And which geographic area was added to the U.S. by the Louisiana Purchase? It's going to be the Great Plains. That being said, another popular map question that's not in here is going to be one that talks about the Proclamation of 1763. Now, you know that line is drawn in, Natalie, I can hear you, the Appalachian Mountains, okay? Not the Mississippi River, the Appalachian Mountains after the French and Indian War. Okay. We have the Mayflower Compact in question number 3, the House of Burgesses, and New England town meetings. What do these things all have in common? They are all forms of early colonial government, or another way the Regents phrases it is, they are early models of the Constitution. Okay, that is question number 3 in June 2011 if you're following along with me. All right, another question that is in there often is the Articles of Confederation question. And to look at this, look at number 6 of June of 2011. The Articles of Confederation, we know, were a failure. What is the main reason they were a failure? There is no strong central government. There is no federal government. They have no judicial system. There is just one branch, and that's a legislative branch. There is no judicial branch. There is no executive branch. Laws can't be enforced. Taxes can't be collected. These are all problems, right? So because it's a weak central, nationally, or federal government, it does not work, okay? Then you have a bunch of Constitution questions. Someone just walked by. This is so embarrassing. The Constitution questions are going to often ask you about checks and balances. Where did we get the idea of checks and balances from? People like Montesquieu, Enlightenment thinkers. That's going to definitely influence how we put together the Constitution. And a way that we add this is with our 3 branches, legislative, judicial, and, I'm listening, executive, okay? Those are the 3 that we're going to have. And sometimes the Regents will give you just a straight, direct question, or they will give you examples of checks and balances, like Congress declares war, but the president sends troops. Congress makes a law, but the president can veto it. And this shows us checks and balances, okay? Oftentimes there will be an anti-federalist versus federalist question. Know who is on which side. Know if you're a federalist, you are more likely to support a strong national government in the Constitution. You're with guys like Alexander Hamilton. If you're an anti-federalist, you're someone like Thomas Jefferson. You are more likely to be from the South and support states' rights. And you're against the Constitution. What did the Anti-Federalists add? They add the Bill of Rights, which is our first 10 amendments to protect the rights of the people, starting with the first one, which is freedom of expression, freedom of speech, right to petition, freedom of religion, all of that, okay? You get my cough in the video too. Know the main tensions of the Constitution. You have a tension over slavery between northern and southern states. You have a tension between states that are large and states that are small over representation, which is why we have the Great Compromise, right? And we are going to see too, after the Constitution, but still an early government question, is the idea of a national bank. So that's question number 10 in June of 2011. And what did Alexander Hamilton use to say he wants a national bank? The elastic clause, which said it's, quote, sometimes necessary and proper to do something that isn't a power in the Constitution. And he's going to say our economy is a mess. Shays' Rebellion shows we can't pay our veterans. We need something here. And he is going to say, let's use this. My phone is ringing in the background. Just ignore it. I'm going to switch this. Okay. All right. Then there's always a John Marshall question. They will ask you about John Marshall in two ways. They will ask you about how he favors national over state. We know that with different court cases like Gibbons versus Ogden and McCullough versus Maryland. Or they will ask you about one of his most famous things, which is judicial review. What court case is judicial review? You're right. It's Marbury versus Madison. I'm kind of getting good at this, I think. Maybe not that good. There is usually a political party question. Remember, political parties, just like the cabinet, were never written in the Constitution. They're examples of unwritten Constitution, but we just always had them. It's just always happened, so we're just accepting them as part of who we are. And the main debate between political parties is always going to be a debate over the national bank. You always see that divide people, whether it's Andrew Jackson down the road, whether it is Hamilton versus Jefferson, and that leads to our first political parties. You see that over and over again divide people into two separate camps, and usually one is more about federal power and one is more about state power, okay? National bank is obviously a federalist idea. Okay, oftentimes I'm looking at question 14 in June of 2011. There is another map question around the time of the Civil War. It will ask you about things like the Missouri Compromise, where Missouri is added as a slave state and Maine up north is added as a free state. And again, that's all about the equal lines, equal number of states, north and south, because it comes down to your representation in Congress. If you have one more state than somebody else, then you have more power to pass a law in favor of your policies, whether they be anti-slavery or pro-slavery, okay? And that's the whole thing with bleeding Kansas, etc. There is usually a Reconstruction question. I'm looking at number 18 in June of 2011. And this one revolves around the Compromise of 1877. We know that ended the moment troops were pushed from the South. And it's business as usual, Jim Crow, a white supremacist, very racist, KKK-driven South as soon as those troops are gone. They try for a while, they divide the South into those 5 military districts, martial law, but it does not stick, it does not stay. And we know the South is largely going to remain in that kind of very racist, keeping blacks under with sharecropping and tenant farming. They're going to remain that way politically, socially, and economically until we get to the 1950s, and that is where civil rights comes from, okay? There's often a trust question. They will ask you about the main people who were behind trust. They're guys like Rockefeller, Vanderbilt, Pullman, and Carnegie, okay? And for the longest time, the government is going to be laissez-faire, hands-off, not going to touch them. The question I'm looking at here is question 22 in June of 2011. And it says, why were trusts later declared illegal? Remember, trusts and monopolies are really the same thing. Why were they declared illegal? Because they got rid of competition. And that's going to be the answer there. There is usually a question about the South after Reconstruction. It might be around something like Plessy versus Ferguson, which ruled that, yep, separate is equal. Or, as in this one, it'll be a voting prevention question, number 23 of June 2011. And it said, why would they have literacy tests, grandfather clause, etc., obviously to stop blacks from voting? Because they knew that a vote was a voice, and with a vote, you would then get some people like KKK members out of the local governments, and hopefully things would change. Again, they don't change. We don't see that change until the 1950s. There's like a glare that's bothering me. Okay. There's usually a progressive question. There's a question like 24 on our muckrakers. People like Ida Tarbell who attack Standard Oil. People like Frank Norris who attack railroads. Upton Sinclair, who writes The Jungle and is going to attack the meatpacking industry, okay? So know those muckrakers, know what the progressive movement is all about. Number 25, there's usually a why we entered World War II question. Remember the phrase is unrestricted submarine warfare. When they are going to have the Zimmerman note, there's going to be unrestricted submarine warfare. Remember the sinking of the Lusitania, all of those things push us into World War I, but it's mainly that one phrase, unrestricted submarine warfare. Then, like 26, there's usually a question about if our president at the time, Woodrow Wilson, put together the League of Nations, why on earth didn't we join it? And it's always the same answer. In the wake of World War I, we are freaked out and scared that it will pull us into more foreign conflicts, okay? There's usually a question like 27 asking why on earth do we hate immigrants so much? We do this over and over. First, we see it with early immigrants, we see it with the Irish, then the Irish grow up, get middle class, get jobs, and they turn against that second wave of immigrants who are Italians and Poles and who are Chinese and Japanese. We see this over and over. We see this today with how we have many policies making it difficult for immigrants, especially Latino immigrants, to come into the United States. The fear there is always that their jobs will be taken by immigrants. And for this one, remember, we're going to put certain limits on certain countries in the 1920s. That's the Quota Acts, National Origins Act. If you are fair-skinned and blonde and from somewhere in Northern and Western Europe, we are more likely to let you in. If you are Jewish, if you are Italian, if you are Polish, if you are Catholic, we are much less likely to let you in. Okay, that's question 27. There's usually New Deal questions, and they usually revolve around a political cartoon like number 29 that shows FDR whipping Congress into shape, who is not in step with him and all these laws that he's passing, crazy amount of laws, first 100 days. That's the Supreme Court, which is why they go after him and take down both the NIRA with Schechter Poultry versus U.S. and the AAA with the Butler versus U.S. And they're the ones who are going to slow him down. His response, he wants to pack the courts. Obviously, that's not going to go over too well. Usually there's a question like 32 that asks us, how do we respond economically to World War II? It's by producing a ton of things, by producing tanks and guns and everything else. Number 32 talks about how women stepped up during this time. So do blacks, so do Mexicans through the Bracero program. This is the time for minorities to rise up and be a part of Central American work and values and important decisions and jobs. And remember, they are not going to forget how that feels. So 32 talks about that. Question 34, there's usually a question on how we are either increasing Cold War tensions, things like the Cuban Missile Crisis, things like the failure to agree on open skies with Eisenhower. All these things increase tensions with the United States and the USSR. When we talk about decreasing tensions with the USSR, maybe we talk about Reagan being more friendly and open with Gorbachev, as Gorbachev is being more open with the Western world at the same time with Glasnost and Perestroika. Maybe there would be a question about Nixon and détente. Remember, détente, decreasing tensions. The DE in front of the word helps us figure that out. And just like there's always a John Marshall question, there is usually an Earl Warren question. We know Warren for always increasing the rights of those accused of a crime. That's what we remember Earl Warren for, and that's question 35. What other questions can we look at? I'm going to switch gears, and I'm going to pull up another exam, and that exam is going to be June of 2010. So if you want to go to the website and switch over to June 2010, I'm going to check these out. Sometimes there is a lobbyist question, and that is number 9 in June of 2010. What is a lobbyist? A lobbyist is a special interest group, someone who gets paid a ton of money in Washington, D.C., especially in Washington, D.C., sometimes other cities, to go and speak on behalf of their group. Whether that's an environmental group, that can be a steel workers guild, that can be a teachers union, and they try to influence lawmakers to make laws that help their special interest group. Okay, so you can have a lobbyist who goes to Washington, D.C. There's about to be, let's say, a big law passed like Nixon's Clean Air Act, and they are for Americans breathing cleaner air. That's their group. They're going to influence Nixon and say, hey, this is in your best interest to pass this. We will get you some votes down the road. We will get you campaign funds. They're very influential in Washington, D.C., especially today. There's usually an amendment question, and that's number 8 of, oh my gosh, I'm sorry, this is August of 2011. It is not, shoot, they labeled it wrong. I'm pretty sure it's June 2010. I would double check, okay? Number 8 in June of 2010, I'm almost positive, but it might be August 2011. This is obviously my first time making one of these videos. The amendment process, why is it there? It's always there to allow for change over time. Our founding fathers are going to see in a very wise way that everything they create is not going to be for forever. And they say, I'm not perfect. That's pretty amazing, okay? There's usually a manifest destiny question. They'll list certain events and they'll say which reflects manifest destiny. Like with number 13, it's anything to do with the Mexican-American War. Ganson Purchase, Mexican Cession, invading Texas, anything we can think of like that, okay? Sometimes there's a tariff question, like number 19. What is the purpose of a high tariff? Remember, a tariff is a tax on what kind of goods? Imported goods, okay? So if you have a tariff, it is to encourage people to buy at home because the American good will be cheaper because it's not taxed as highly. You make the foreign good more expensive to encourage people to buy at home. Sometimes there is a question on Teddy Roosevelt, not as a progressive president, but as an imperialist president, like number 22. And we have to see that with how he is going to have the Panama Canal, how he's going to have the Roosevelt corollary, which says stay out of Latin America, all of these things. Look out for questions that ask about writers of the 1920s, like F. Scott Fitzgerald. Also writers of the 1930s, like John Steinbeck. I'm looking at question 31. It will ask you, where did this literature come from? Because of the conditions of the time, whether that's materialism in the 1920s, encouraging F. Scott Fitzgerald to write The Great Gatsby, or the Dust Bowl conditions that encourage John Steinbeck to write The Grapes of Wrath, right? There's always that question about our civil liberties being threatened. I'm looking at question 35 in June of 2010. When does that happen? It happens during times like the Red Scares, the first and the second one. It happens during times like World War II with Fred Korematsu being arrested and told his rights are not valid right now because it's a time of, quote, national security. It happens with the USA Patriot Act today as we have a war against terror. It happens anytime the government sees fit and looks at, okay, collective security versus our personal liberties. And a lot of the time, our personal liberties lose out because of this. What else should I talk to you about? Understand that the 1970s, I'm looking at question 41 in June 2010, the 1970s are going to be a time where we lose a lot of confidence and trust in the government. Think about the War Powers Act after Vietnam and how much people disliked LBJ. Think about Watergate scandal and Richard Nixon. Okay, so we're talking about question 41, how we lose faith in the government. In comes Ronald Reagan and he restores that faith. Bum, bum, ba, bum. Jimmy Carter and Bill Clinton are sometimes compared together because they were such big human rights activists. Bill Clinton's going to send troops into Bosnia. Jimmy Carter is going to criticize apartheid. He is going to support the UN Declaration of Human Rights. He is going to, we know, bring together the leaders of Egypt and Israel during the Camp David Accord. So sometimes those guys are compared, and for good reason, because Clinton was mentored by Jimmy Carter in a lot of ways. I'm trying to think if there's any other questions we should be on the lookout for. I mean, there always are, for sure. But I think we've hit on the major ones. So ladies, as always, it's a question of just always practicing, just preparing. And I swear, if you like slow this video down and put it to techno music or do something stupid like that, I don't know. I can't think of anything right now. I won't give you a popsicle on the last day of school because that's what I'm planning. Okay? Keep practicing, keep going. Don't watch this too many times because you've got to do it. You've got to do it and you've got to just practice those questions. Go through. Any exam is going to be good practice for you, whether it's August, January, or June. We said June is most likely to reflect, but these questions repeat. And if you notice you keep getting the same type of question wrong, do something about it. Write it down, Find questions like it. These always go in chronological order from 1 to 45. We said the last 5 questions are a mix, okay? So just practice as much as you can. You guys deserve an amazing grade on this. An amazing, amazing, like 99, 100. That's what I want from everybody, because you can do it. Okay? I'll see you tomorrow. Bye.